Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular board meeting of Monday, October the 18th. I would call this meeting to order. Firstly, I want to offer the regrets of Trustee Chris Brainey. Chris is unable to attend with us this evening. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and our schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, we learn, and we live. Before we carry on, I would draw your attention to the beautiful paintings on the cover of our agenda package. Indigenous art highlighted at our schools and at the Ed Center. The artist, the creator of these beautiful paintings, is John Caldwell. And John is a member of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. He's a former student of Port Perry High School and a former student of S.A. Cocker School in Port Perry. He's painted a number of Indigenous murals throughout our board and at the Ed Center. And in these paintings, he is honoring treaty partners, and we are attempting to create a warm, welcoming, inclusive environment at our board. Thank you, John. These are wonderful. Moving on, it's time to sing O Canada.
Épopée
des plus brillantes exploits.
God keep our land.
Loyal sings free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for
Thank you, students. We look forward to the day when we can welcome you in the boardroom and actually meet you. That was wonderful. Thank you. You have an agenda in front of you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, we will move on. You have an agenda. Are there any amendments to that agenda? Trustee Edwards.
Yes, I would like to add under other business, trustee determination and distribution, the regulation 41200, and just timing of that.
So you are going to discuss with us trustee distribution and timing?
The regulation 412-00, trustee determination and distribution and the timing of the process.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, Trustee Templeton. All those in favor? Thank you. Then we have an amended agenda in front of us, and I would like a move to adopt that amended agenda. Could I have a motion, please? Thank you, Trustee Thatcher, seconded by Trustee Lundquist. All those in favor? Thank you. The agenda has been approved. We have 4 sets of minutes in front of us. We would seek to have a motion to receive the minutes from June the 21st, June the 22nd, and September the 7th, and motion to approve the draft minutes of board meeting from September 21st. Could we have one motion to receive and approve those 4 sets of minutes? Thank you, Trustee Templeton, seconded by Trustee Barnes. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on. Community presentations. Do we have any?
We don't, Chair Morton.
Thank you kindly, Director Marsh. Moving on then with Director Marsh, ministry memorandums and information update. We always look forward to this.
Thank you, Chair Morton, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I wanted to begin the update by talking about locally, our elementary progress reports will be going out from November 9th to 11th. We have asked staff to reach out to all families where progress with the Ontario curriculum may have not necessarily met the provincial standard at this time. We all recognize with the interruptions to learning that the pandemic has presented over the course of the last year and a half, that some students may not yet be at the provincial standards. So we have asked staff to reach out to ensure families that there is that open communication and a number of strategies taking place to support students as they learn. We've also this year reintroduced once again our after-school tutoring program for mathematics and language literacy. So we're happy to see one of those programs return to our schools. In addition, we recognize that over the pandemic, areas such as the arts, physical education, and technology weren't necessarily explored the way that they would have been in person. And so we very much are reinforcing the importance of all subject areas as we engage our students holistically upon their return and ensure that as we look at the achievement, that we're also focusing on well-being, their sense of belonging, and making sure that the transition back is as smooth as possible. This month, the Ministry of Education has released that it is Cyber Awareness Month in the education sector, and Durham District School Board is very pleased to participate in Cyber Awareness Month, given the importance it has to us in terms of both student information security and staff information security, as well as safety. In fact, we will be doing many of the activities from the Ministry of Education, but also we focus on cybersecurity every month of the year in Durham District School Board, and we'll continue with that practice this year. Wanted to make trustees aware that the Ministry of Education has released a memo asking school boards to participate in international assessments. You may recall that international assessments are conducted in Ontario over a course of several years to inform research in terms of how Ontario is performing against other jurisdictions. Unfortunately, given the extreme efforts that school staff are making right now with pandemic management, as well as daily reports to the Ministry of Education, and our focus on ensuring that we have students completing the Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test, which can only be done in person, which is going to require a lot of logistical planning in terms of students who are in the virtual school. For all of those reasons, we have decided this year that we will not be able to participate in the international assessments within Ontario, but in future years look forward to participating once again. Wanted to flag for trustees that there are some upcoming proposed changes to the Education Act. The government introduced Bill 13, Supporting People and Business Act 2021, Bill 13. and it went for first reading as of October 7th. And as part of this bill, the term of a new board during a municipal election would begin on November 15th instead of December 1st, beginning in the fall of 2022, and wanted to make sure you were aware of that development. As you know, the ministry has also been publicizing the availability of potential rapid tests for students who are asymptomatic, and that they would be working with regional health units in terms of the distribution of those rapid tests. So Durham Region Health Department is in possession of some rapid tests. We are still working with them in terms of the logistics of how to potentially distribute those to any students who might be interested in doing asymptomatic testing. One of the challenges we have, Durham Region Health Department has informed us that the ministry is shipping them kits that aren't actually put together, and they don't have the staff to actually put those kits together in terms of the testing kits. So we're looking at how to problem solve that and make those testing kits available, but recognizing it's not feasible again for school staff to be taking on that item at this point, which was what the Ministry of Education had suggested that we do. I also wanted to flag some very positive news in terms of menstrual products. This board had supported, after a student presentation last year associated with the inequities associated with menstruation, you had decided that we would be providing free menstruation products to elementary and secondary schools. So that we would combat period poverty together. The Ministry of Education released this month a memo stating that it would, in partnership with Shoppers Drug Mart, be providing school boards with those menstruation products. So we would not have to be purchasing them. However, within their memo, it addressed that they would be providing numbers reflective of students aged 13 and up. And as you know, we have a broader perspective in terms of period poverty and the populations impacted by it. So those are the updates in terms of the Ministry of Education of this last month. And I'm going to be happy to share good news later in the meeting. So happy to take any questions on those items right now. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Director Marsh. We welcome any questions or comments. Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. My question is actually about something that you mentioned in the very first stage of your commentary, and it was about elementary schools specifically. But I'm wondering if you can address the issue in high schools, Director Marsh, because, and through you, Madam Chair, because, you know, I certainly don't have any sort of peer-reviewed studies or longitudinal analysis or anything like that, but I've certainly heard from parents who are deeply concerned that there are gaps in knowledge for students who have lived nothing but a pandemic really since they started high school. And I have the same concerns for my own child, frankly. And I have not seen any sort of program to sort of assess where kids are in terms of their learning. And that, I know that that happens in the classroom to some degree, but I'm wondering about a very like something formal, because I think we're missing big gaps. I really, really do, and it's worrisome.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton. In terms of a system-wide tool that we would be using to address any potential learning that still needs to occur that isn't where we would typically expect it to be, we actually don't use a consistent tool, and that was something that the Ministry of Education and federations and school boards signed on to. It was several years ago, and I want to say probably around 2012. So boards at one time did use consistent tools, and as part of some arrangements, it was indicated that teachers would have flexibility in terms of choosing the assessment tools they wish to use. So we don't have one consistent measurement tool where we're collecting that data. What we are doing, though, is working with educators in terms of providing different supports where we're seeing the impact of the learning interruption. And I'm happy, if you like, I can turn it over to Superintendent Negro to talk a little bit more about what those interventions are at elementary and Superintendent Neville's at secondary, but I recognize that really wasn't your question, so I won't do that unless you indicate that that's of interest to you at this time.
I actually would like to hear about the high school interventions, if that's possible, only because I've not heard from any parents from elementary where I think there's like a closer relationship with students because teachers are with them all day, that it really becomes, like in my mind and from what I've heard, an issue in high school. I mean, I'm saying there's not an elementary school issue. I'm more confident of the plan for that. I'm just more concerned about what's happening in high schools because of the disconnect and the very short quads and all the rest of that.
For sure. So happy to turn it over to Superintendent Neville's. One thing I will share, however, is one of the things we're hearing is that it's the early years that appear to be most impacted so far. So that isn't, again, from a specific tool, but I just thought I would flag that for your awareness. And Superintendent Neville's, do you mind responding specifically to the question?
Most definitely. So in secondary, we continue to monitor, as we did last year, students' achievement rates through the report card. So it's a benchmark for us on whether students are being successful within their courses and whether they are prepared for that next level of instruction. Throughout the pandemic, the achievement results within the report cards did not differ significantly from our past practice. And we looked significantly to compare between virtual and in-person student learners. And the achievement within both was fairly close to each other. In terms of supports for students that have gaps, all of our past supports are still in place in terms of our programs that we have within schools, in terms of our student success programs, our extra help programs. Schools can also run before and after school, lunchtime, those type of extra help programs for students that are struggling. One of the things that we emphasize and we encourage all of our teachers to do is to try to meet the students within their classroom to fill those gaps. And even though the quadmesters are shortened and seem to be a little faster for both our students and teachers, the 150-minute block also provides greater opportunity for teachers to do one-on-one tutoring within the classroom to help fill in some of those gaps that students may have collected throughout the pandemic.
Thank you. Moving on to Trustee Forbes, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question around the menstruation products. So thank you for the update, and I'm glad that there's kind of a provincial wide approach that's being taken. I was just wondering, in terms of you referencing the 13, the age, and will we be, we'd already approved providing the menstrual products. So I was just wondering, are we going to maybe provide, because we know people are menstruating at younger and younger ages these days, and I was just wondering if we'll be backstopping that in any way, or how that would work if we are.
Director Marsh, would you like to answer?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton, happy to answer. So we will roll out the program as the motion indicated from this Board of Trustees last year. And that was that it was for elementary and secondary students. And we will provide as the demand is there. The difference now will be we're going to be getting some shipments in from the ministry, and we will distribute those, and we will still require to get our own shipments in terms of whatever that difference may be. So they have estimated our shipments, and it'll be interesting once we start getting these shipments to see how they've estimated it, but it is based on our enrollment from 13 and above of those who would be menstruating. So that's as much as we know at this point, but I'm sure we'll find out more as they roll it out.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Director Marsh. And we have student trustee Kayla Malcolm, who is willing to question or comment. Kayla?
Hi, through you, Chair. Just kind of what you were just speaking about, how are you estimating the need for elementary students? How are we getting that shipment count?
Director Marsh?
Thank you. And Associate Director Wright, do you have the specific information in terms of how we're currently distributing to schools?
Thank you, Director Marsh, through you, Madam Chair. We do have dispensers that are set up in some elementary schools, and they're filled on an as-needed basis. They have been for some time. We have started the program of expanding free distribution of menstrual products throughout the system. My understanding is that menstrual products have been available at elementary schools, but through the office, either the main office or the guidance office. They will be available in washrooms going forward as we're able to install dispensers. So it will be run through the schools. Basically, Trustee Malcolm, we will ensure that the dispensers remain full. It'll just be part of the custodial regular routine. So we're not so concerned on relying on the shipments from the Ministry of Education. We'll make sure that we have enough supplies on hand to handle that, the requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright. I see no further questions, so we will move on. Public question period, and I understand we have two people with questions. We have Dylan. Dylan, would you like to come forward with your question, please? There I see Dylan. Come, Dylan.
Good evening, Carol Martin, and good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I just want to give people a little rundown before I start with the question. My name is Dylan Reynolds, and I live in the city of Pickering, Ontario, which is right on the western border with the city of Toronto. And my question tonight is, a couple of times this year in 2021, I asked you guys about the bell times at secondary school running from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. school day. I'm wondering, have you guys considered the impact of students not being able to pick up younger siblings and part-time jobs? And also another impact would be that on November 7, 2021, we returned to standard time, meaning students would be walking home in the dark from November as well as both December and January.
Thank you, Dylan, for that question. I think we'll go to Director Marsh for an answer.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton, I'm actually going to request Associate Director Wright to respond this evening to this question, given that there is a report coming forward that he'll be presenting shortly.
Thank you, Director Marsh, through you, Madam Chair. Hello, good evening, Dylan. Your question is very timely, as there's a report coming forward this evening later in the agenda that will highlight a bell time review we're currently undertaking, which is in large part to address the 10 to 4 secondary day. Specifically to answer your question, yes, we did know that extending the afternoon bell time for secondary students would put some families in a difficult position with younger childcare, and also that it may impact a student's ability to obtain after-school employment. It was a very tough decision that we made. And unfortunately for this year, we were faced with either scheduling secondary schools while knowing we may not be able to provide transportation on a consistent basis due to lack of driver ability, or moving to a later secondary bell time. We chose the option that gave students greater certainty, or gave us greater certainty of our ability to provide access to education in terms of providing students a bus. But we are moving forward right now, as a matter of fact, to be able to offer better service to our students for next year. So stay tuned. Later in the meeting, we'll have some more information. Thank you.
And my follow-up question is that
Dylan, is your follow-up question based on the 10 to 4 bell time?
yes. And as far as 10 to 4 bell time for me is that at primary secondary school, for example, I have been experienced that there's been a lot of experience with traffic in the afternoon, at least. There's a lot of traffic going down, a lot of traffic getting into Pine Ridge and heading down Liverpool Road and backing up as far as Bushmill. And also another question I've had is that Pine Ridge moving it as part of the Beltline review. Is Pine Ridge, are you guys planning to move the bell time at Pine Ridge Secondary School back to an 8:10 start in the morning, or a 2:10 and a 2:10 start in the afternoon?
Thank you, Dylan. I think that your follow-up questions will be answered, as Associate Director Wright indicated in the report that you will have later in this meeting. So stay with us, Dylan, and your questions will be answered. We have thank you, Dylan, for joining us. We have a second questioner, and could we meet that person now, please?
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Akua and I'm a resident of Whippy. For my question, we know from evidence that youth are at the highest risk of mental health illnesses, which have been heightened during COVID-19. I was pleased to read that the DDSB has implemented a well-being and mental health strategic plan to support students, parents and guardians, and staff. For my three-part question, with the plan ranging from 2018 to 2021, first, how will the current plan be evaluated? Specifically, what methods will be used to measure success of the plan? Two, what data has the DDSB collected so far on the number of mental health encounters experienced by the same target audience, more so the students during the time frame of the strategic plan? And three, are there any plans for the DDSB to implement the mental health teams as permanent ongoing supports across the school board? Thank you.
Excellent questions, very pertinent to this time. I think we will go to Superintendent Andrea McCauley to respond. Andrea?
Thank you so much, and through you, Chair, and good evening, Akua. Thank you for your questions. How are you? So our inclusive student services teams are part of every single one of our school communities, whether that be for in-person learners or through DDSB at home. And those teams work through an integrated approach. So every school is supported by a member of psychological services, so mental health staff, a social worker, mental health staff, a special education consultant or facilitator, speech language, and hearing and vision consultants. And they form a team that support all of our schools. And that's one of our established commitments in how we support student learning and well-being. While we've moved through the pandemic, we've used the increases in funding to specifically increase our staff, particularly around mental health. So funding has been used to increase the number of psychological services staff members, as well as the number of social workers serving directly students and families in the board. As well, we've used funding to trial a pilot project for well-being youth workers. And so these are CYWs that work right alongside educators in classroom, focused on social emotional learning, because what we want to do is bolster healthy, mentally healthy classrooms, and then support through the students that need more intensive supports, including working adjacent to our community partners as well. And so we've done that with the Catholic Board, our public board, and some of our community partners in sharing dollars and resources to mobilize some supports. A couple key things that we've changed during the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, all of our services required written consent, as well as were delivered in person. And so what the pandemic taught us was an opportunity to mobilize verbal consent for our families, particularly our adolescents and our youth, as well as engage in virtual services. So students that can access from home or connecting with parents and caregivers. And those are both two things that we're going to keep after we move through the pandemic, as well as our mental health button on the DDSB website, meant to take down some barriers to access so families can just click directly. Specific to this specific school year, so again, we've looked at that augmentation of staff, and we've also put additional staff into some of our priority secondary schools And we're piloting some group sessions because that builds a peer community for our adolescents and takes a look at that for how we have services have greater reach. We immobilized some team members to bolster transition at the beginning of the year as well, with support of our trustees and budget to that extent. Our teams are evolving in their data processes, so thank you so much for the question around that. It's one of our growth areas. So our teams largely have done data based on counts, how many consents have been open and things like that. And what we're really moving to is the impact of the services, exactly what your question asked. We want to hear from our kids and our families. Was the service impactful and how did it help? And how can we use that information to shape? So we're moving in that direction. In terms of what we're seeing in a trend for our kids right now, adolescents, we're seeing a higher risk of self-injury. We're seeing a predominance of anxiety and stress, as well as depression, as our students are missing those activities that are normally resilience factors that connect them to joy and each other. So to be responsive in that referral process, healthy coping is now a part of all of our services, both at the classroom level and individual service. So we're moving on our metrics, and we have a partner with School Mental Health Ontario to look at that data piece in terms of how are our services impacting our kids, because we really need to be connecting with the experience of the kids and if the service is meeting their needs. So that student voice is really, really important. In terms of the mental health strategic plan, as you said, we've got one that goes to 2021, and we're about to relaunch the process to write for the next 3 years. So that foundation of how we've moved through COVID, because it will not be a specific time period that has a beginning and an end without trails of impacts, such as Trustee Lundquist's question this afternoon, a couple pieces. In terms of the impacts, right, in terms of learning and well-being for our kids. And so what we want to do is take what we've mobilized in the last year or two, how that's impacted the mental health strategic plan in order to create the plan for the next 3 years. So what the community can expect is an opportunity to have input on the plan, for us to be moving in some of those data metrics pieces, and then be able to shape that and we face forward. For our kids and how we keep those commitments. Our mental health staff are not going anywhere. We're here. Mental health learning, our mental health well-being goes right alongside student learning and how we serve kids in the Durham region. So sorry, that was a bit of a roundabout way to saying we want services to be impactful, and we recognize that mental health and well-being sits right along learning in our commitment as a board in serving kids across the system.
We appreciate your answers, Superintendent McCauley. Do you have a supplemental, or are you pleased with Andrea's response?
I have a supplemental question, if that's okay.
Certainly.
So first of all, thank you very much, Andrea, for that really, really comprehensive response. I really appreciate it. Getting back to what you said in regards to the cohorts. So is it like, for instance, if I have a mental health team that has a counselor, a CYW, am I pocketed to a certain number of schools or like a certain area of schools? And the reason why I ask is that in terms of data mapping, again, getting back to the impact piece, if we're finding that in a corner of, let's say, Northeast Whitby, we're seeing a high number of students with potential substance use, self-harm and things like that, versus if we're looking at, let's say, Southern Whitby, again, there could be reasons into many intersectional factors, race, equity, we know income being the high social determinant. How are we then piecing those things together in terms of data entry by area, in terms of then mapping out the further questions that we have of how do we help and target these group of students who is clearly, based on whatever factors they're having, are having a particular interest or issue here than we are in a group of students there. And how does that team work together in terms of case management, in terms of helping that with that holistic approach?
Thank you so much for your question through you, Chair, if that's okay, Trustee.
Sure, absolutely.
So I really appreciate your question because it hits on exactly how we've been trying to reshape services to be more responsive. And so our teams are different for each of our schools because the size of the teams are each different. And so what we try and do is use a number of data sources, including referral points, as you said, type of referral, and just volume within a school as well, because we want to be bolstering mentally healthy schools. So there's that foundation of where mental health staff are. And that puts a certain allocation out. So our staff know for approximately half day or full day a week allocation to each building. And then we've moved that up for some of our priority secondary schools, where we actually have 2 individuals going in on separate days, so that we can do some of those responsive pieces, as you say. We're really lucky in who is part of our experience team and who has joined with experiences outside the board to form our mental health support teams. And so we've got individuals who have served victims of trafficking internationally. We have individuals that have served directly in Indigenous communities. We have individuals that have a variety of lived experiences. And when it comes to mental health supports, we know that being culturally responsive to our kids and mapping to people that have experiences around what is core needs or intersecting needs is really important. So we will actually move staff across schools to get best fits for some of our kids in terms of their service plans. So in general, our staff know that they have a body of schools that they're supporting, because we know that relationships also matter. And so we want those integrated teams forming those relationships and really coming at it from a whole school to classroom to individual student. But where that's not best fitting for an individual student to a mobilized service, our staff will swap and engage in informed consent, as I said, based on experiences, skills, lived experience, and being responsive to the student and family. We're getting there. It is an imperfect science, for sure. The kids are always at the center in how we do that service planning, and that's how we refer to it, a plan of care in terms of an intervention. And then obviously families and caregivers, as well as our community partners, are integral to that. So many times it's not just board staff, but also community staff that have been engaged for a student that are working in tandem, because we want it to be helpful to the student, not another layer for them to navigate when they're already at their most vulnerable. So not perfect, as I said. We're working on it and continually refining it, but we're getting there as a district and putting mental health and well-being right alongside learning. So thank you for your questions this evening.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Do we have any school board presentations this evening? Seeing none, I'm going to go to number 11, and I'm going to go to Vice Chair Christine Thatcher and ask her for the report from the Committee of the Whole in camera.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in camera and adopted the motions made at the Committee of the Whole in camera meeting as follows. The disclosure of intimate, personal, or financial information in respect of a member of the board or committee, an employee or prospective employee of the board, or a pupil or his or her parent or guardian. Chair Morton, this is my report.
Thank you for that report, Vice Chair Thatcher. Moving on, good news from the system. Let's hear our good news. We are all eager to hear this, Director Marsh.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton, I'm happy to introduce our video with our student narrators this month.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of DDSB students and staff, we are happy to bring you good news from across the system.
The Town of Ajax Anti-Black Racism Task Force's Diversity Exchange Speaker Series welcomed DDSB Principal Eleanor McIntosh and Superintendent Margaret Lazarus to speak about helping community members navigate the school system. The event provided a positive space to facilitate thought-provoking discussions to help address and understand anti-Black, systemic, and institutionalized racism.
On September 9th, Dumbarton High School unveiled 2 new murals from community artists and DDSB alumni in the school library aimed at having fellow students see themselves reflected on the walls of their school. John Caldwell's Indigenous mural and Jeffrey Lane's Black History mural is one way that Dumbarton is reinforcing its values of equity for all and an expression of their commitment to allyship for their entire student community.
As we recognized Orange Shirt Day and the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, students and staff across the DDSB wore orange shirts, social media accounts shared important messages, and flags were lowered to commemorate and recognize residential school survivors. Schools engaged in learning about the residential school system and the ongoing impacts of colonization. The Indigenous Education Department continues to support Indigenous students, caregivers, and staff.
Student finalists for the annual DRPS Police Chief for a Day have been announced, and DDSB students are well represented. They include Sophia from Walter E. Harris, Connor from William Dunbar, Anuba from Alexander Graham Bell, Izzy from DDSB at Home Virtual School, and Haley from David Bouchard. Congratulations to all our finalists. Bryson from S.A. Cocker Public School also won the Junior Fire Chief Contest in the Township of Scugog for his great work about fire alarms.
National Custodial Workers Day was October 2nd. Students and staff from across the DDSB expressed gratitude for the amazing custodial teams. Thank you for keeping our schools clean and safe each and every day. On October 5th, administrators and students showed their appreciation for teachers on World Teachers Day. Messages of gratitude were shared with educators for their ongoing support, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you to our excellent teachers for all that you do.
To support Franco-Ontarian Day, staff provided resources and information to school administrators. Every school received a Franco-Ontarian desk flag to proudly display within their building. A range of resources were provided, including a school copy of the book Les Visages de la Francophonie, Region de Durham, written by Durham Region resident Suzanne K. Minong. This book shines a spotlight on the Francophone community in Durham, which is over 10,000 people strong.
Here are some of the ways that DDSB students and staff support our community. Keaton from Ormiston Public School organized a fall food drive for his school community, along with his friends Bobby and Alan. More than 2,000 non-perishable donations were collected in support of Feed the Need in Durham. Uxbridge Secondary School is lending a helping hand to community members by launching a refugee clothing drive. Staff and students at Pierre Elliott Trudeau Public School recently launched their Socktober campaign to collect and donate new pairs of socks to Oshawa community shelters, including Denise House, The Refuge, Cornerstone, and Life. Students across DDSB organized their own Terry Fox-inspired events to raise money for cancer research and support Terry's message of hope. Students from coast to coast in Canada even had the opportunity to virtually meet Fred Fox, Terry's brother, as he helped kick off events for the Terry Fox Foundation.
We would also like to take this time to congratulate grade 7 student Andrea Taylor from Gandat Satyagon Public School. Andrea is 12 and recently teamed up with a partner to place first at the Under-12 Canadian National Tennis Championship. Way to go, Andrea.
As you can see, the dates of significance take us to the end of November.
Thank you to Sarah and Michael from Brooklyn High School for reading this month's good news.
And Chair Morton, that does conclude the good news just from this month alone within Durham District School Board schools.
Thank you. Thank you also to Sarah and Michael. We have so many good things that we need to celebrate. We are doing well under the circumstances. So thank you to all. Let's celebrate. Moving on, we have a recommended action report from Standing Committee, October the 4th. Christine Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Morton. The following motions were carried and the resolutions were adopted at the Standing Committee meeting during closed session on October 4th, 2021. Moved by Trustee Michael Barrett, it is recommended by the Audit Committee that the Board of Trustees extend the term of appointment of trustees on the Audit Committee to a 2-year term to provide consistency to the committee effective December 2022. It is recommended by the Audit Committee that the Board of Trustees extend the term of appointment of trustees currently on the Audit Committee by 1 additional year to provide consistency to the committee and align to provincial elected terms. Chair Morton, I move that the board now receive the minutes and approve the actions of the October 4th, 2021 Standing Committee, including during closed session, and adopt the resolutions that were passed.
Thank you. We have a motion moved by Christine Thatcher, Could I have somebody second that motion? Patrice Barnes, all those in favor?
Sorry, Trustee Morton, comment?
Oh, certainly. I'm sorry, Michael. Comments, of
Yeah,
course.
just a quick question for clarification. There was a motion brought forward. Are we going to be dealing with that separately after the passage of this, or are you encapsulating that all into one motion? And I'm talking specifically with regards to the motion about extending the terms of the audit committee members. Just seeking clarification.
Trustee Thatcher?
You're on mute, Trustee Thatcher.
I think at the meeting, I asked if we were going to deal with those separately or together. And the answer was that we would deal with those motions together. So I have moved it that way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I'm just seeking clarification just to make sure that it was actually dealt with. So that means, just to clarify, that if we second this motion and agree to it, that indeed we are extending the terms of the members of the audit committee. I just want to clarify that. If that's the case, I see a nod, then I'll second the motion if it hasn't been seconded already.
Thank you. We have a motion. It has been seconded. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please indicate if you are supporting that motion. In favor of. If you could use those green check marks or red X, that would be greatly appreciated. Motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to information items. Audit committee meeting. Back to Trustee Barrett.
Thank you, Chair Morton. Again, I will be quick with this. I'll really talk about the elements found on 4.0 of the report found on page 33. Just to be able to give you a quick summary of the actions of the Public Audit Committee. We did have a discussion at the Audit Committee with regards to the scope of responsibilities of the Audit Committee of the Code of Conduct. And we also had the annual agenda plan that was presented by Associate Director Wright to bring forward, which was also approved. He also presented the report, the annual Audit Committee report to the Board of Trustees, which is going to be presented after this by Associate Director Wright. And we also a similar report of the annual Audit Committee report that has to be submitted per procedure to the Board of Education. And it's going to be presented tonight as well. So I'll leave that there, Chair Morton, because the meat of the meeting and the fiduciary and legislative responsibilities are going to be presented next by the Associate Director. Thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Are there any comments or questions for Michael? Seeing none, we will move on to the annual Audit Committee report. Associate Director Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening. Based on Ontario Regulation 361.10, audit committees of school boards in Ontario are required to submit a summary of their internal audit activity to the Ministry of Education on an annual basis by January 15th. Appended to this report on page 37 of your package, you will find the summary that will be submitted to the Ministry of Education, highlighting the work that was performed over the 2021 school year, as well as the internal audit work scheduled to be prepared or performed over the current school year. Happy to answer any questions through you, Madam Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Associate Director Wright. We're looking for any comments or questions. I'm seeing none. We'll go on to C, the annual Audit Committee report to the Board of Trustees. Again, back to Associate Director Wright.
Thanks once again, Madam Chair. Based on that same bit of legislation, 36110, the audit committees of school boards in Ontario are required to provide a bit more detailed report to the Board of Trustees on the activities of the audit committees over the previous school year. And so that you will find appended to the report on page 40 of your package. The report is provided to the board for information, and it is not forwarded to the Ministry of Education. And that is my report. Happy to answer any questions through you. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I am seeing none. We'll move on to the bell time review, and we've already discussed it a little bit with Dylan, but I know that there will be lots of comments around the bell time. So we will go to Associate Director Wright again to introduce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a great pleasure to welcome and introduce Kelly Machulin, who is the head of Durham Student Transportation Services, who's joining us this evening to present the report. Kelly, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the bell time review report can be found on page 42 of the agenda. The report is an information item, and it gives a brief outline of the current situation with DSTS. Like two of the overall goals of the bell time review. First, it's to address the current 10 to 4 secondary school bell time, and also to maintain a fleet level that would make it possible for us to recruit and retain enough drivers to support all transported students. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
I hope that Dylan is still here and is listening. Questions, comments? Trustee Edwards first.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions because, I mean, the last time we did this comprehensive view, it involved both boards because DSGS, our co-termers board, the Catholic School Board, because you provide services for both the public board and the Catholic School Board. So I'm just wanting to ask if they will be involved with this as well. And then the second question is around proximity to elementary, between elementary and secondary, and Catholic and public schools. We work through a few issues within our community because of the close proximity between two schools, whether it's our co-terminus board and ourselves, or our high school and our elementary, to make sure that those things that we've worked through, that they don't get, we have to work through again during the next review and change of bell times, and that they are taken into consideration.
Thank you, Donna. Kelly?
Yes, so we do realize that proximity and sometimes concentrated traffic congestion around places where there may be more than one school, that will be taken into consideration as we embark on the review.
Thank you. Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you. So I have to admit, I struggle a little bit with transportation because we're a little bit removed from it. And it's one of the things that I get the most calls about, honestly, which I think probably comes as no surprise. One of the questions I had from a parent, and I have it now myself because I'm looking at the report that's in there on the bell time review, and it says, in September of 2022, the majority of secondary school bell times were adjusted to 10, and we know that. But it was this part that actually caught my attention, and it aligns with the questions that I had, which was issues that included an anticipated bus driver shortage. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the scope of the bus driver shortage. And then I just want to flag a particular route because it comes up a lot, and it's the Ashburn route for students going to Brooklyn High School. And so I know it's been adjusted, but I am still hearing that children are not getting to classes on time. they're getting to the school on time, but it's not an adequate time to get to classes. So I just want to flag that because it's not one parent that has mentioned it. I have 4 different emails and several messages about it. But if we could start, please, with an understanding of how many drivers are we short and what steps are we taking to address the shortage, please.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. So early this year, we started to speak to our bus operators about driver levels, retention, how many they felt that they could recruit and train during pandemic conditions. Our estimation was approximately 520 to 530. That's turned out to be correct. We are a little lower than that. Right now, we're in a position where we have a driver for every bus route. However, we do not have a lot of spare coverage. So in the morning, sometimes DSTS is moving routes, moving the operator who may be covering the route in order to ensure that we have a driver each day for each route. So that's where we are right now. And that is one of the overriding goals of this bell time review, is to maintain a level of fleet that we know that we can comfortably recruit enough drivers and retain enough drivers so that every student has service.
Supplemental, Trustee Lundquist?
No, I'm not actually going to ask about, like, for an answer on the Ashburn route. I'm just putting it out into the universe, hoping that somehow it gets addressed because it's a concern for parents.
I'll have staff take a look at that tomorrow. I wasn't aware that there was still issues with the timing, but that bus does have GPS on it, so we can track the vehicle and its timings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to Trustee Barnes, who has a question.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been answered, but I was wondering, in regards to us doing a bell time review and sometimes route reviews, how much do we integrate with Durham Transit? Because a lot of our high school kids are just under that 3.1 kilometer to be bused, but they're looking at 45 minutes to an hour walk to get home. So I'm just wondering, how do we look at that? And I know Durham Transit sometimes cancels routes without even, and we don't know as trustees, but I wonder if that's a conversation that you have.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have regular meetings with Durham Region Transit. Durham Region Transit, they do have the responsibility for the routing. Right now, the routing's been somewhat exceptional in that not all routes are functioning. They have an on-demand service that customers, including students, can call for service, but we continuously meet with them. If there are concerns about a particular area, we can certainly escalate that to the meeting and speak to them about it. We had some problems last year, Town Line Oshawa, getting some of the students into Central Oshawa, and we met with Durham Region Transit about those issues. And as always, as they are paying clients of Durham Region Transit, they have a customer service line as well, and they can escalate any of their routing concerns through the customer service supervisor with Durham Region Transit as well.
Patrice, do you have a supplemental?
No, that's it. I just have concerns with quite a few of for some of my schools in regards to that busing and not being able to even take transit. And as we're going into winter months, I know that that is going to get even more challenging right now. So I just wanted to put that on the table as well.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Moving to Trustee Barrett, you have a question.
Yeah, not so much a question, Chair Morton, but certainly a comment building upon what Trustee Barnes has spoken about. And I know that Trustee Edwards has spoken about this in the past, but certainly on sitting on the Transportation Subcommittee for the Ontario Public School Board Association, it's unfortunate that those municipalities or those boards that actually have public transportation have probably a much better working relationship with the region on supplying busing. And Kelly, in no way am I suggesting, having sat on the DSTS for 7 years, would I suggest that it's not for a lack of trying on our part to be able to continue to build that relationship. And so certainly the methodology by which we integrate both, public transportation and our own transportation is not effective. And I think, and I'm not, again, not blaming you for this one, Kelly. I've sat there and I've watched the outreach. I've seen at our own board, the outreach that has been tried to be able to take place. We have not recognized in the region of Durham the necessity of integrating the two systems in order to be able to ensure that what we're doing is finding the most effective way of transporting our students. And to your point, Trustee Barnes, about if we can't supply buses because you're 3 kilometers away, Durham transportation somehow doesn't become an action. And just to be able to put it in perspective, I was speaking to a trustee from the Ottawa Carleton board, which I know some of our staff have some experience with, who relayed on Saturday at a meeting that I attended that their local transportation services and the school board communicate towards the beginning of school, and they actually put on extra routes where there's going to be issues. That would be nirvana for us because that does not occur. And so therefore, even when we begin to consider bell times, which I recognize is a methodology of being able to stopgap some of the issues, and I know it's probably one of the toughest things that we deal with, as trustees, because transportation is a critical component for those that we bus. I think that we have to, as a board, I'm not suggesting yourself, but as a board, continue to leverage for a new partnership with our local region when it comes to transportation. These are the same kids, they're the same customers, and I certainly think in an environmentally friendly manner, what we're doing is not exactly green either. So, but just keeping that in mind as we move forward with bell times, that part of that should be leveraging the region for a better partnership for transportation, because it is not effective. And I would say that we're definitely behind other regions that provide public transportation, or at least have access to public transportation. So thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, would you like to comment?
No, just that we continue to meet with them. I think that they have a lot of constraints on their system as well. But we'll certainly continue the conversation with them to find out how they can assist DSTS and secondary students in general throughout the board.
Thank you, Kelly, for joining us this evening. I see no other questions, so we will move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is a discussion of the vaccination policy. In response to the direction of trustees, we have placed this item on the board agenda to have a public discussion on whether or not to mandate COVID-19 vaccinations. The current provincial direction to school boards on this topic requires school boards to implement a protocol that requires staff to disclose their COVID-19 vaccination status. If any staff are not fully vaccinated and do not have proof of a medical reason, the province has mandated that they are required to participate in an educational session about the benefits of COVID-19 vaccination and to undertake 2 COVID-19 rapid tests per week. We recognize that this is a topic that has undergone much debate at other school boards and in the province. I would ask that all trustees speak through the chair on this item, and I will now take a speaker's list. So if you would like to address this topic, we would like to hear from you. Trustee Crawford, you are first on the speaker's list. Paul, okay.
Didn't realize I had such quick hands. Well, I'll speak to this quickly because we have had some discussion, and my main concern on this is not necessarily worried about the rights of people who are we might be saying to them, you must get vaccinated. My main concern is safety. safety is paramount. One of the discussions we had before was that asking people about their vaccinations could be affecting their rights, and we could end up with legal problems. Well, not having a safe environment will put us in greater jeopardy for legal problems. So I'm only asking the trustees, as they're having discussions about this, to keep in mind that safety is paramount, and we are responsible for the safety of all students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sure that we are all in agreement with your statement. Moving to Trustee Lundquist.
Well, apparently I'm going to be slightly disagreeable because I'm not sure I actually am in agreement with the statement. I'm in agreement with the principle of it, however. So I have a whole bunch of questions, and I'm going to start with the procedural issue that I'm having with this. We have it on the agenda as an information item. There's no motion on the table that is in the record, at least, and I'm puzzled as to the scope and contours of this discussion. So I'm hopeful that somebody can tell me what we're speaking to, because I've never seen a board just talk about, their views of things. And I'm not sure that that's useful in terms of time. So I'm hoping that somebody can tell me what we're speaking to specifically, because I don't see a motion in the material, and I find the whole procedure a little bit off-putting, frankly.
Thank you, and I would answer that. It is under an information, as trustees wanted it on the public agenda, and there's no action being recommended at this time. So it's for information purposes only. Does that help you with understanding?
Well, no, respectfully not, because the thing for me, Chair Morton, is that generally a procedure in front of a board when you're having a discussion about something is there's a motion on the table and you're discussing the merits of the motion or not. And so is this just to for trustees to float out whatever idea they have on this and what to do? I just am not clear on what we're doing or why. So I have strong views of a whole bunch of things, but I don't want to take up a ton of space if this is actually meant to be a more narrow discussion.
I hope that I can answer your question. At the last meeting, the Committee of the Whole passed a resolution that this would be put on the public agenda tonight. The board has approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole, and so we have a resolution that the matter be discussed in public. That's why we're here. That's why it's a public discussion.
Okay, I will, that doesn't actually address my issue, but I will come to it later if there's an opportunity to do that and time permits. If I may, then I would just like to ask some questions so that I can better inform my thoughts and sense of this, if that's okay.
Certainly.
So my questions are really about, I just want to be very, very clear when I say this. I'm very pro-vaccine. I believe in it as an important tool for pandemic management, along with PPE and other protocols. And so I don't want there to be any confusion about that. But I also want to be clear that we're not virtue signaling, that we're not doing something because, or attempting to do something because we think that's what somebody else wants. So I'm trying to understand the scope of the issue before us, and I don't mean in terms of the pandemic generally. The thing for me, I think, is that I understand that we have a high vaccination rate, and that's one of my questions. But I also understand that we're not medical experts, any of us, and most of us are not lawyers, so we're not super equipped to assess law either. But what we are well positioned to do is to try to understand the scope of a problem that's happening in the system or within specific schools. And to me, if we can understand the scope of the problem, that will help us come to the most appropriate resolution. Because what I agree with Paul or Trustee Crawford, my apologies, Trustee Crawford, is that what we actually are required to do is balance safety with privacy considerations and the rest, and come up with a plan or a policy that appropriately strikes a balance. I don't know how to find a plan that strikes a balance without actually doing some of the work up front. And I don't know that we've done that work. So my questions are as follows. And, you know, if you want to interrupt me, Chair Morton, because there are too many, I understand, and I will cede the floor to whoever. But does the board have any data that suggests that any school transmission or outbreak is linked to unvaccinated employees? And if so, can someone please advise as to what role that transmission link, you know, the person who has transmitted it, what their role is in the school? For example, there are particular people that I'm more concerned about. So, you know, you have teachers in classrooms and EAs, and you have admin and offices and office staff and whatnot. But then you also have things like lunchroom supervisors who are coming in where children are unmasked and eating. So I'm curious if there is any transmission, and if we can identify, while still maintaining confidentiality, where that transmission would be. I'm also wondering if the board can confirm the vaccination rate for staff as of today's date, or the most recent date that they have. So I know that the ministry actually required that we kept records of this with the attestation, and that we're supposed to update that monthly. And that testing was a part of that. So how many staff are actually being subject to testing, and are we following up to ensure that that testing is being done? Because I don't know what that process would look like.
Trustee Lundquist, may I suggest that we stop there and get answers to those questions?
Yes.
I think we've got a question on transmission rates, vaccination rates, and testing. Am I correct?
Mostly, yes.
Then I'm going to go to Director Marsh. Who would like to answer that question, would you think?
Thank you, Chair Morton. We're going to start with Superintendent Mundy, and then if we need to add on, we will do so. But I think she probably through HR has the most significant amount of data in terms of what we are able to answer at this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Morton. With the first two questions around transmission, the difficulty is we don't actually have data where we can track school transmission or outbreak to unvaccinated or vaccinated staff. We do have a very small number of staff as well that have, you know, in terms of any positive cases. So that's a positive there. And we do maintain our vaccination status for all employees is confidential. And so therefore, it's obviously difficult for us to provide that info. As of Friday, so the last time we submitted our updated vaccination rates was Friday, October 15th. We've been asked by the ministry to share that information for permanent staff as well as occasional staff, so dividing that. Our permanent staff have a 94% vaccination rate, and our occasional staff have a 91% vaccination, fully vaccinated rate. That means, you know, the last question I heard was about numbers, right? And who are involved in testing, and then how we're monitoring that. So we have about 700 who are either for medical, they're unvaccinated or wish not to disclose, who are required to complete the rapid testing. Of that, we have about 100 that are at DDSB at home. So obviously working virtually does adjust that, and we track that. We do have a number of occasional staff that have not submitted information, and we're working right now because a number of them have not worked for us. So we're sort of following up in terms of those that have worked as priority, and then working through that. So each Monday, staff who are part of the rapid testing requirement are expected to complete a Google form where they share their rapid testing results. They have to provide proof of those results, And on Tuesday, we're actually reviewing and pulling data from those and then following up appropriately. There's an opportunity in that form to share any barriers as to why it was, did you not get your rapid test? Because we've had to courier some, we've had different things or other concerns, and we've been able to follow up through emails and phone calls to ensure that we're in compliance. I think that was all the questions that I heard so far.
Thank you, Superintendent Mundy. Trustee Lundquist, do you mind if I go to 2 other trustees and then come back to you?
I do not mind at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford, you have a question.
I have a question, but I've been up once already, so I'll wait until there's an opening.
Then we will go to Trustee Stone and come back to you, Paul.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just have kind of a general question to trustees. We know what the protocol is in place now, which catches people if they are unvaccinated. They're testing twice a week. It would catch them whether or not they're asymptomatic or whether or not they're symptomatic. So I'm wondering what if trustees are thinking that this protocol that we have in place now, there's something wrong with it. I think it's a good protocol coming down from the province because it does catch people before they come into school from the Sunday, and then they test on the Wednesday. So unlike the fully vaccinated teacher, the supply teacher recently went into a London school, and that came through one of our OPSPA updates in the news I was reading. This supply teacher was in 14 different classrooms, fully vaccinated, and it ended up that she had COVID. So she did transmit that to one other student. Could be more students, we don't know, because the students, often younger people, are asymptomatic. However, what I have a problem with is that only unvaccinated are being tested. What I think should also be added to our protocol, in the very least, that there should be random testing of vaccinated staff at the schools. The other problem I have is that if somebody comes down with symptoms at the school, they should be tested before they leave, because they've now possibly infected other people. So for me, there should be a test, that 15-minute rapid test. If that staff member is positive, then we can at least alert the staff members who have, and the students who have also been in contact with that teacher or the staff member. And then I realize they will go and get the proper test from one of the test centers. It could be a false positive, I don't know, but at least we're catching it earlier than we normally would. So my question, I guess, to the trustees is what, I agree with Trustee Lundquist. I'm not quite sure what we're discussing. Is there a problem with the protocol that we have now? And would trustees be willing to add to that protocol with random testing for vaccinated staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Stone. I think Trustee Barrett is willing to respond.
Not necessarily. So, I wasn't going to somehow become a medical expert and suggest changes in the protocols either. But what I was going to do is, and I don't have a problem if Trustee Crawford had a question, because I was going to talk more, Trustee Morton, about the continuation of this conversation. So if you want to address Trustee Crawford first, then I'll come back after that if it's okay with you, Trustee Morton, because Paul had a question, specific question.
Perhaps we should go to Director Marsh, and I would like to talk about Trustee Stone's question. Is the province talking about expanding the testing program?
So we have answered this question previously in terms of the medical officer of health for Durham Region, as well as the chief medical officer of health, have been very explicit that the purpose for asymptomatic testing is for, or the rapid testing is for asymptomatic individuals. In fact, it does often do false positives. So even if you do get a false positive, you have to go to a testing site to confirm that testing. From an operational perspective, I think we would be hard pressed in terms of accessing rapid tests for and administering them in terms of those who are double vaccinated. They did get double vaccinated because of the direction, or one of the reasons and commitments made to them was that double vaccination meant that they wouldn't have to undergo testing in terms of being back to work when the ministry released its direction at the end of August. Associate Director Markowski, I know that you're meeting regularly with Durham Region Health, and I'm happy if you have anything further in terms of the medical opinion of that.
Thank you, Director Martian. The only other thing I would add that Trustee Stone touched on was in relation to individuals who may become symptomatic during the day. We have consulted with our public health unit in relation to that. And I think first thing is just the struggles of trying to operationalize something to that magnitude in terms of a system response would present its own challenges, Trustee Stone. But the second piece that we've received confirmation on is that when an individual does become symptomatic during the day, to your point about potentially implementing rapid testing, there's still going to be a requirement, as you mentioned, for them to go to an assessment center. And we've received confirmation from the public health unit that the actual rate of transmission in a situation like that is so low that she actually said it's extremely low, that there is no actual documented cases here in Durham where that has occurred. So I just wanted you to know from a transmission or risk of exposure, it really is minimal to what I would say very minimal in terms of risk management. That was it from my end, Director Marsh.
Thank you, Associate Director Markowski. I do have a speakers list. We will go firstly to Trustee Crawford, then Trustee Barrett, and Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Crawford, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The question that came to my mind when we were discussing that is that most of the people attending are students. We're not just talking about staff, we're also talking about whether it should be mandated that students be vaccinated, keeping in mind that more than half of our students, which is 70,000 total, 35 to 40,000 or maybe more, are under 12 and therefore can't be vaccinated. So it comes back to my major concern is safety. So can we say that the protocols being used now are safer or as safe as mandating that everyone be vaccinated?
I think further to your question, Trustee Crawford, we could ask staff the percentage of our 12 to 17-year-olds who are vaccinated. And I would expect that we have that information available to us. Director Marsh?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Morton. Associate Director Markowski, do you have that information?
No, sorry, and Trustee Morton and Director Marsh, I will look that up and I should be able to respond momentarily.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that will answer Trustee Crawford's question. Moving to Trustee Barrett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Morton. And I was going to perhaps echo some of the comments that had been made earlier already, that unless, there is some sort of direction that we as a board want to be able to take, then this does just really become, a merry-go-round of a conversation. I mean, I think there are some fundamentals that we as a board have to answer. And I don't think that we should, shy away from it in the sense of whether or not we want to have, a transparent, robust conversation. And I guess that the answer that we all have to answer as a board is whether or not we feel that as a board, we should go beyond the existing ministry protocols and be able to go forward with implementing something that's outside the parameters. And I'm not going to put that motion forward because I don't believe that. But I believe that's really where we're going around the circle. So we are kind of just talking, because I know that all of us are dealing with this in different ways. I run a company. I'm dealing with the same questions. There's people around here that are dealing with all this all the time. Looking at a number of faces on the screen here, we're dealing with this on an hourly, daily basis. And so to me, it's about either we're going to go forward with determining whether we want to be able to go beyond. Trustee Stone has said, about doing random testing, and all I would say is not for me either, only because that involves a whole lot of other avenues of just going around a workforce and randomly testing people for COVID. Yuck, yuck, yuck. I'm running away. But to me, that's really the fundamental, Chair Morton. Otherwise, we're just kind of doing this. I don't want to put the motion forward to bring this to conclusion because I won't support it. But that's really what we're talking about. And, we could go on all night if that's the case. Not that I mind conversation, because I know that's what Trustee Crawford's going to say. Good conversation and debate, that's good. But we do have to have some conclusion on where we're going to go. So thank you, Chair Morton.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. This is an opportunity for us to share our thoughts, our thinking, but this will not carry on for a long time. We will draw this discussion to a conclusion very soon, but I will go back to Trustee Lundquist and Trustee Crawford because I did promise them that they would have another question. Trustee Lundquist?
I appreciate that. And I actually appreciate Trustee Barrett's commentary because we could talk about this forever. It's a contentious issue. It is something that many of us are dealing with on a daily basis, some of us all day long. And it's a difficult thing to resolve because there are strong views of it. And here's, I think, what I would like to say about that. I mean, it's helpful to hear the very high rate of vaccination, but I don't know that that's helpful for me in terms of understanding if there is a group of people that are unvaccinated that are in schools or not, right? Like, I don't know if that 6% of permanent staff or the 9% of occasional staff, I don't know what that actually means. Like, they're numbers, frankly. And I'm not scared of numbers. I just, in a system this large, I don't know if there's a concentration of it in a particular area or whatnot. And I understand confidentiality as much as the next person, but it's very hard to ask yourself a question like this without actually understanding the contours and context of what's happening, which was actually what precipitated my initial questions. So, I don't know if I want to go further at this stage than the ministry. I think that there probably have been a provincial decision about this that was reflective of local context, but still had sort of provincial standards. I think that would have simplified things for everybody. But ultimately, I wouldn't move this motion at this stage either. And I just want to be clear that the fact that we're discussing it doesn't prevent us from moving a motion in the future on it if that becomes necessary or if we view it as necessary. But one of the things that I would like to see is the deferral of it, frankly, because I don't know that we've actually consulted with anybody on this. And this is a super important issue, right? This is a safety issue, and it's a safety issue for students, and it's a safety issue for staff, and we should understand what the risks are. And I don't think we have any of that information in front of us. So I'm not one that likes to engage in debates without information. And I don't want to go, like Trustee Stone and I are not going to see eye to eye on some of this, and we'll see eye to eye on others, and other trustees and I, and amongst themselves, they will see things differently too, because we're all able to read and take in information and whatnot. But the problem that I have is, how do you know if you need to go beyond a provincial mandate if you actually don't understand the contours of what's happening in a school, what the educators in the school are saying, what parents think about it? Like, I don't know how we do that without actually consulting our communities. And I don't think we've done that. So I'm not prepared to move a motion unless the motion is to defer this discussion until such time as we have consulted with the community, determine the importance of this issue in the community. And that could include all kinds of consultation with public health or whatever. I'm not asking to decide what the, what the details of that consultation would look like, but it seems to me that if we're going to even consider going above and beyond what the ministry has done, and we've done that in the past, so I'm not concerned about doing that per se. I just think that you do that with information, and I don't think we have that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Trustee Lundquist. And I think your message is we need to gain as much information as we possibly can in order to make a decision. One last, oh, Trustee Barnes, you had your hand up. You took it down? Thank you. One last question before we draw this discussion to a conclusion. The final word will be yours, Trustee Crawford.
Madam Chair, I was going to move a motion, but listening to what's been said, I'm not going to move a motion at this time. I think this discussion might require a motion to come forward later. So at this time, I'm not going to suggest that we mandate vaccinations. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for a very healthy discussion. Moving on in our agenda. SEAC committee report. Let's go to Trustee Edwards.
The minutes of the SEAC meeting of June 17th is found on pages 48 to 54, and that's my report.
Comments or questions for Trustee Edwards? Thank you, Donna. Moving on to an OPSPA report. Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. My report is quick. There was another region meeting on Saturday for trustees. There's also transitioning from the COVID-19 school experience education partner table that met on October 13th, 2021. They discussed the OPSPA student survey that was done prior and shared with trustees. And they're presently working on refining the future discussion topics that would go forward in shaping and putting to the government what post-pandemic education could look like. And that is my report.
Thank you, Patrice. Any comments or questions regarding the OPSPA report for Trustee Barnes? Trustee Edwards.
I just wanted to comment that too, it's local government week and that there's a variety of messages and so forth as far as trustees. As we know, elections are next year. And we also know that voting rate is usually fairly low in municipal elections and usually even lower for trustees. So it's sort of an opportunity for people to get to know what trustees do.
Thank you. And pre-COVID, we could have been visiting our schools and talking about government week, but we do have limitations. Thank you, Trustee Edwards, for bringing that to our attention. Trustee Crawford, question?
Well, just the fact that this is coming up, is the trustee anticipating that the government will soon be asking us questions about trustee distribution and determination?
Trustee Edwards, would you like to comment?
When we get to the item, I'll cover the process, and that will hopefully answer Trustee Crawford's questions.
Thank you. Moving on, I'm going to skip over number 15. We will come back to 15. I would like to address the other business. So going back to Trustee Edwards, and she's going to discuss with us the trustee distribution and determination and the timing of that. So Donna, I think this is a really important topic and I'm glad that you've brought it forward. Trustee Edwards?
Yeah, okay. So as I just mentioned, the trustees elections are in October of 2022. And so there's a process that is involved that happens prior to an election. And it's stated under Ontario Regulation 412/00 is that it sets out the process of which the number of trustees are determined for each school board prior to an election. And then also in that process, school boards are required to do the distribution of trustees. Okay, and this all happens prior to the election in October. The regulation actually states that the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC, is responsible for determining the total number of trustees for each school board. And they actually provide us which is called the PEG report, by February 15th and the year the municipal election is happening. So in February of next year, we will get this PEG report. And that determination is based on a formula that is regulated around the total population of the electoral group within the board. If you remember last time, for those that were sat around the table, in that the PEG report that we received from MPAC actually showed a decrease in the number of electors in our public board, which we questioned because we know the population is rising and we've had more students attend our school board. And what we found out during that particular time was that MPAC no longer is responsible for really maintaining anything other than the ownership of a property. So if an owner has a tenant and they haven't been in there, they don't have to, or you have children that are over the age of 18 and over, they don't have to carry that information anymore. So the voters list that they actually, or the number of voters that they have listed, would not be accurate. We actually, as a board, had a report that was developed through staff looking at the census population, and based on a percentage of what would be considered public education voters, we had determined, our staff had determined that we would have possibility of having a 12th trustee. And so the PEG report is done by the 15th. And then what happens is that once we get the PEG report, trustees are required to do the distribution. And if, again, just sort of the history, that's when we redistributed one of the trustees from the north to Whitby the last time around. My issue is that they have changed the Municipal Election Act to assign the responsibility of the voters list to Elections Ontario. And although they might have a updated voters list at this point in time from the past federal election, and will have one for the provincial election, it will not contain, because they are not required to carry it, it will not contain the tax supporter information that is carried in the property or MPAC data. So what will happen this time is somehow they're going to have to marry the two data sets. That process hasn't happened before. And so there's going to be an issue again when MPAC is required to create this PEG report. If they're in time for the 15th, will they actually have access to an accurate voter list in order to determine that? And so will we get the same results as that, or maybe even worst case scenario, because we know that there's a lot of changes. We've had a lot of move-in and house buying. Will we actually lose even more voters? And so our distribution could possibly maybe go down to 10 trustees. Who knows? Like, that's probably not the case, but I'm just saying that that data is not up to date. So timing is critical because once we go through the distribution, it has to be approved. The PEG report, and if the PEG report says that we get a 12th trustee, it has to be approved through the government process. And I'm not sure about the legislative requirements. But my issue is that the legislature rises at the beginning of December. They do not come back until after Family Day, which I believe is the 21st, which when we would already need our PEG report. And we have to do our distribution and have it in by March 30th or 31st. So I have a concern about this whole process and the people that are the groups that are responsible for it. And it's only required for trustee elections. It doesn't happen. They don't care about tax supporters for municipal elections for councillors. It's only for trustees. So I have a huge concern on, is this going to be done? Or is it going to be accurate information? And where that leads. And in some cases, I'm kind of think that maybe as a board, we might want to write a letter to the Chief Electoral Officer and the Ministry of Education to basically say, are they going to have the data ready and accurate information ready for our PEG report to make our trustee distribution? I really do have a concern about this.
Thank you, Donna. Are you making a recommendation, Donna, or are we seeking more information here?
Well, really, it's not up to us. It's up to electoral officer and the Ministry of Education on how this goes. And so I'm just seeking that, maybe I could put a motion forward that we write a letter to the Chief Electoral Officer and the Ministry of Education to ensure that the most recent register of voters is used by impact to calculate our trustee determination numbers for school boards. And school boards are provided the trustee determination calculations and numbers no later than the February 15th deadline.
Well, I think we definitely need to investigate this more because we don't want to do this in February when the deadline is March. Are there ideas on how we should proceed? Trustee Stone?
No, I was just going to say I would second that motion if Donna was putting forward a motion to at least what we could do is send a letter. Thank you.
So we have a motion put forward by Donna. Would you repeat that motion, please, Donna? Regarding your letter?
Okay. To write a letter to the Chief Electoral Officer and the Ministry of Education to ensure that the most recent register of voters is used by impact to calculate trustee determination numbers for school boards, or if in our case for the DDSB, and that we are provided with the trustee determination calculation and numbers no later than the February 15th, 2022 deadline.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor put forward by Trustee Edwards, seconded by Trustee Stone. We have questions or comments. Trustee Crawford, you're first.
Well, I'm not against sending that letter, but my concerns came up earlier in the discussion. We will get notification from the ministry about the trustee determination and distribution sometime before March of next year. And one of my problems is, and I've raised this before, is that we have a missing link that we need to look into. We amended our bylaw in September of 2019, and at the time, the bylaw that we amended was November the 16th of 2015, except that March of 2018, we amended the bylaw because that was an election year, and everybody remembers that. However, that amended bylaw is not part of our records. So someone needs to get to work and find out where that missing link is way prior to March of next year.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Trustee Crawford. Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you, Chair Morton. I don't have any objection to writing a letter. I'm just a little bit concerned because there's like, I don't know where the best information is. And it's hard for me to know that when all I've heard is Donna's viewpoint for 2 minutes. I haven't seen any documents that indicate exactly how this happens and whatnot. And so she might be entirely right, and I don't doubt it. I would prefer, you know, some time to take a look at it myself to understand the scope of it. That's all.
We have a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. We will now take a vote. I ask all trustees to go to their reactions. A green check mark would indicate that you are supporting that motion. A red X would indicate that you are opposing that motion. Would you please do that now? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that that letter will be written and you will see what the wording is. Trustee Edwards?
And I would just say that I know that this will come back because staff will have the information, et cetera. It will come back eventually because we do have to discuss trustee determination and the distribution of, because that's part of the whole process and we're required to make, it's under the regulation that is there and there's certain motions that we must pass, et cetera. So it will come to us eventually. This is just to make sure that we get the right data.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. That was another healthy discussion and something that needed to be brought to our attention. Now I'll go back to the correspondence and you will see that we have a number of letters in correspondence regarding a number of topics. And I encourage you to read those letters. And if there's no other business, consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you and have a good evening, everybody.